My friend, can we explore together something that touches the very core of human experience? In those moments when life becomes overwhelming, when someone says something that pierces your heart, when you receive devastating news, when you feel rejected or betrayed or deeply disappointed, what happens to you? Do you become consumed by anger, drowning in sadness, paralyzed by fear? Or perhaps you do the opposite, shutting down completely, becoming numb, disconnected from feeling anything at all. These intense emotions seem to have such power over us, dictating our actions, clouding our judgment, sometimes making us say or do things we later regret. But must it be this way? Is it possible to remain centered, aware, and intelligent, even in the midst of life's most challenging emotional storms? Let's begin by watching what actually happens when a strong emotion arises. Perhaps you're in a meeting at work and your supervisor criticizes your project in front of your colleagues. Immediately, you feel heat rising in your chest, your face flushing, your heart rate accelerating. The mind becomes defensive, formulating responses, justifying your choices, attacking back either verbally or silently. Or maybe the emotion that arises is hurt, a deep ache in your chest, a feeling of being misunderstood and unappreciated. In either case, notice that you are no longer present to what is actually happening in the room. You are lost in your emotional reaction, unable to hear clearly, unable to respond intelligently. But what if, in that moment of criticism, instead of being swept away by anger or hurt, you could observe the emotion as it arises? What if you could feel the heat in your chest? Notice the defensive thoughts forming, and yet remain aware that this is what is happening rather than becoming what is happening. This subtle shift from being the emotion to observing the emotion changes everything. Consider a more personal example. Your romantic partner says something during an argument that cuts deeply, perhaps bringing up old wounds or touching on your deepest insecurities. The natural response is to be flooded with pain, to lash out in return, to say something equally hurtful, or to withdraw completely, building walls to protect yourself from further injury. These reactions seem automatic, inevitable. But are they? Watch this sequence very carefully. The hurtful words are spoken. There is an immediate physical sensation, a contraction in your chest or stomach, a literal feeling of being wounded. Then the mind begins its commentary. How could they say that? They know how sensitive I am about this. I cannot believe they would use my vulnerability against me. This mental story amplifies the initial hurt, creating layers of suffering on top of the original pain. But notice that between the hurtful words and your reaction, there is a space, however brief. In that space, you have a choice. You can choose to be consumed by the emotional reaction, or you can choose to observe it with gentle awareness. This does not mean suppressing the emotion or pretending it does not exist. It means being present with the emotion without being possessed by it. When you observe emotion in this way, something remarkable happens. The emotion is allowed to arise fully, to be felt completely, but it does not control your action. You can feel deeply hurt and still respond with intelligence rather than reactivity. You can acknowledge your pain without using it as a weapon against your partner. You can honor your sensitivity without becoming a victim of it. Let us explore another common scenario. You receive news that someone you trusted has been talking about you behind your back, sharing information you thought was confidential, perhaps even distorting the truth in ways that damage your reputation. The immediate response might be betrayal, anger, the urge for revenge, or perhaps deep sadness about the loss of trust. These emotions feel overwhelming, consuming your thoughts, making it difficult to focus on anything else. But observe what happens when you do not resist these emotions or judge yourself for having them. Betrayal is arising, anger is present, sadness is moving through your system. These are natural human responses to having trust broken. The suffering comes not from the emotions themselves, but from your resistance to them, your judgment of them, your demand that you should not be feeling this way. When you allow emotions to be present without fighting them, they follow their natural course. They arise, reach a peak, and gradually dissolve. But when you resist them, judge them, or try to escape from them, they become stuck, creating long-term resentment, depression, or anxiety. This does not mean becoming passive or failing to address situations that need attention. If someone has indeed betrayed your trust, you can have appropriate conversations, set boundaries, or end the relationship if necessary. But you can do all of this from awareness rather than from reactive emotion. Actions taken from awareness are usually more effective and less likely to create additional problems. Consider the challenge of dealing with fear in tough moments. Perhaps you are facing a serious health diagnosis, a financial crisis, or the possibility of losing someone you love. Fear can be so overwhelming that it paralyzes your ability to think clearly, to make good decisions, to take appropriate action. The mind becomes obsessed with worst-case scenarios, spinning endless stories about terrible futures that may never come to pass. Fear is one of the most primal emotions designed to protect us from danger. But in modern life, most of our fears are psychological rather than physical. We fear failure, rejection, loss, death, uncertainty. These fears often cause more suffering than the actual events we are afraid of. How much of your life has been limited by fear? How many opportunities have you avoided? Relationships have you sabotaged? Dreams have you abandoned because of fear? But what is fear? Actually, if you observe it closely, fear is largely composed of thoughts about the future combined with physical sensations in the body. The mind projects terrible scenarios, and the body responds as if these scenarios are happening now. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your stomach churns, all in response to imaginary events. When you recognize this clearly, when you see that fear is mostly mental construction rather than present reality, its power over you begins to diminish. You can feel the physical sensations without being controlled by the mental stories. You can acknowledge uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. You can take appropriate precautions without living in constant anxiety. Grief provides another profound opportunity for emotional mastery. When you lose someone you love, when a relationship ends, when a dream dies, the pain can feel unbearable. The conventional response is either to be overwhelmed by grief or to try to avoid it through distraction. Substances or premature attempts to move on. But neither approach allows for the healthy processing of loss. What happens when you meet grief with complete presence? When you allow the waves of sadness to move through you without resistance, without judgment, without the need to make them stop. Grief, when allowed to flow naturally, is not just pain but also love. It is the love you feel for what has been lost, expressing itself as sorrow. When you resist grief, you also resist love. In the depths of grief, if you can remain present and aware, you may discover that your capacity to feel deeply is also your capacity to love deeply, to appreciate beauty, to experience joy. The same sensitivity that makes you vulnerable to pain also makes you open to wonder. This is not a consolation prize for suffering, but a recognition of the wholeness of human experience. Anger presents its own unique challenges and opportunities. In a moment of intense anger, whether triggered by injustice, frustration, or feeling threatened, the impulse is either to explode outwardly or to suppress the anger completely. Both approaches create problems. Explosive anger often damages relationships and clouds judgment. Suppressed anger can become chronic resentment, depression, or passive-aggressive behavior. But anger, like all emotions, contains intelligence when it is observed rather than acted out unconsciously. Anger often points to something that needs attention, a boundary that has been crossed, a value that has been violated, an injustice that needs addressing. When you can feel the energy of anger without being possessed by it, you can use its information and power constructively. The key is learning to be with the intensity of anger without immediately acting on it. Feel the fire in your body. Notice the thoughts that are arising. Observe the urge to lash out or withdraw. In this conscious contact with anger, you can respond appropriately rather than react compulsively. You might need to remove yourself from the situation temporarily, have a direct conversation about what disturbed you, or take action to address an injustice. But these responses will come from clarity rather than reactive heat. Jealousy and envy often arise in tough moments involving relationships or success. You see your colleague get the promotion you wanted, watch your ex-partner with their new relationship, observe friends achieving things you have been struggling to accomplish. The emotions that arise can be intense: jealousy, envy, inadequacy, resentment. These emotions feel shameful, yet they are also very human. When jealousy arises, the usual response is either to act on it through confrontation or manipulation, or to judge yourself harshly for feeling something so petty. But jealousy, when observed with compassion, often reveals deep longings and insecurities that can be addressed with kindness rather than judgment. Perhaps the jealousy points to dreams you have abandoned, values you have compromised, or a fundamental lack of self-acceptance. Loneliness presents another profound emotional challenge. In moments when you feel deeply alone, misunderstood, disconnected from others, the pain can be overwhelming. The impulse is often to reach out desperately for connection, to seek validation from others, or to distract yourself from the feeling through various activities or substances. But what happens when you meet loneliness with presence rather than avoidance? Loneliness, when encountered directly, often transforms into solitude. The desperate need for external validation gives way to a deeper self-acceptance. You discover that you can be alone without being lonely, that you can enjoy your own company, that external relationships are enhanced rather than diminished when they come from wholeness rather than neediness. As we explore these various emotional challenges, notice that the approach is always the same: presence, awareness, acceptance of what is arising without resistance or judgment. This is not a technique to practice, but a recognition of your natural capacity to remain conscious even in the midst of intense experience. The emotions will continue to arise in tough moments. This is part of being human, part of being alive and sensitive to life's inevitable challenges and changes. But you do not have to be at the mercy of these emotions. You do not have to be tossed around by every emotional wave, losing your center, your clarity, your capacity for intelligent response. Right now, as we conclude our exploration, you might notice emotions arising in response to what we have discussed. Perhaps hope, skepticism, relief, or doubt. Can you observe these emotions without immediately acting on them, without needing to resolve them or make them different? In this simple observation, in this gentle awareness of whatever is arising, you touch the place of mastery that is always available, the eye of the storm that remains peaceful no matter how intense the weather becomes around it. This is your natural state, my friend. Not something you need to achieve, but something you can remember and return to in any moment, however challenging it may be.